So just to sort of just start off with, before we talk about the, sort of the film part, just in terms of your sort of career hosting, how do you, I mean, I know that you've written and but how did you get into sort of broadcasting, or how did you get into broadcasting?
Well, sort of by accident, really. I left university and I wanted to go abroad and teach, and I had a job to go to in Zagreb, where my mum's from, to teach English at the university there. And then I broke my leg playing football and ended up doing a journalism course, and then ended up somehow I got on television. The one thing you need to be a TV presenter is only one thing, is that you've got to find somebody daft enough to give you something to present. Because you can be the best presenter in the world. If nobody gives you anything to present, the world's not going to find out. So I just found a guy daft enough to put me on air, and I took my chance. And he died last year, sadly. He was only 61, but I owe it all to him. His name was Paul Gibbs, and so I sort of got lucky, then took my chances, and sort of by and large really enjoyed it.
And when you are a live broadcaster, a lot of the stuff that you do is live. How do you deal with those kind of potential dead air moments? I mean, have you always had the gift of the gab?
Well, I don't know about that. I just once you get over the sort of the fear aspect of doing live, it is so much easier, because you go in, you balls it up, you go home. That's it. If you're doing recorded television, there's producers with old-fashioned ideas about actually, doing it over and over again until you get it right. I mean, the most extreme example, actually, I was in a film I was cast in a film widely regarded as possibly unfairly, I don't know, but it was derided as possibly the worst British film ever made. It was called The Sex Lives of Potato Men, and the writer and director was from Birmingham, and he'd made a short a few years earlier, and I said to him, if you get your big feature, write me in. And short, never heard from him again until about 10 years later. He said, right, I've got my feature film, it's going to be on national release, and I want you in it. So I played myself as the host of a sex party. And I don't know, I looked appalling in it. The film looked sort of okay to me, but I don't know whether the poor bloke's career ever recovered. But I mean, what I was going to say, that is an enormous amount of hanging about making a film. How anybody doesn't go start staring mad. But I used to go out with a famous-ish actress, and she used to say, look, you're not paid to act in films, you're paid to hang about. Which is what you do, come out your trailer and try and look remotely credible when you do.
I don't think The Sex Lives of Potato Men has made it to our screen yet, but perhaps, if only that had been your screen epiphany moment, you could, no.
I didn't think of that, actually.
Was that your only brush with film? Was that the only time?
Yes, it is. It's I studied English literature, a completely pointless exercise, really. I spent 4 years at university. All it did was put me off reading. It didn't really, I couldn't really justify the money the taxpayers spent educating me, especially because it put me off reading. And what I couldn't do was suspend disbelief. Only now, 25 years later, can I read a novel and suspend disbelief and just lose myself in the story. But for some reason with films, even if I'm not enjoying the film, I'll be absolutely lost in it. I can suspend disbelief incredibly easily. Never once, even if I hate the film, I don't think, oh, there's cameras everywhere there and there's lighting and they're all sitting in the trailers. So for that reason, I find it sort of rewarding, very sort of escapist thing to do.
So when we first started talking about what film you might choose as your epiphany moment, there were a couple that we kind of ended on, but can you just tell me about your thought process and what you were kind of thinking about?
As far as I understood it, it wasn't so much your sort of favourite film as a film that moved you, that sort of changed you in some way. So almost of necessity, I felt I had to go a long way back. And so I just thought of the films I'd seen, which I remember being moved by. And so I picked this one, and also the Birdman of Alcatraz. And it was fascinating going back and watching them both. Fascinating because I couldn't remember much about them, beyond the absolute basics, man in prison with a bird, and then Sergeant York, kind of war hero. That's all I could remember, but I knew for sure I was profoundly moved. So when I went back to look at it, I found it really quite an emotional experience, because what I was actually doing was exploring my younger self, looking at it, was thinking, well, was it that moved me, or was it that? And I then realised also I had my first kind of what you might call a senior moment when I was about 12 years old, because all my life with Sergeant York, all my life I've been professing a great love for James Stewart. loved him, fell in love with him in Sergeant York. Imagine my disappointment when I went back to Sergeant York and it wasn't him. It was Gary Cooper. I was like, it's just very strange. And I still like James Stewart, but so I even got that wrong. But then looking into it, I can, because in both of those films, there's a kind of a schoolboy flavour to it, war hero. Who doesn't like that as a 12-year-old boy? Birdman of Alcatraz, about redemption and all that, and this poor guy who finds his way back into society, sort of eventually through this little bird. What's not to love about that? But there's a very strong religious theme in them both. And,
yep, there is.
I wasn't religious at all in the, at that time. My family are complete atheists, and I never went to church or anything. But then I became a Catholic in my sort of desperately late 30s. So it just made me wonder whether there was some germ going on.
I mean, that was one of the most surprising things in a sense, was that when you made those two choices, and I thought about them, I thought, well, there's definitely a thing about faith, spirituality, and particularly in Sergeant York, about redemption, about, and actually, I had just assumed, even I knew that you had kind of, found religion in later years, but I'd assumed you'd come from a very religious background. That just isn't the case at all.
No, not at all, not at all. My mum's mum, my Croatian grandmother, was a churchgoer, and I went with her occasionally. Just to be roundly mocked by my own parents for praying. But I was probably only praying for West Brom or something, I don't know. But I used to pray by the bed in Croatia, and they'd stand in the door and laugh at me and call me Holy Joe, which didn't sound like cricket to me, but that's what they... But, but I sort of survived that and became a Catholic later. But just seeing the... Yeah, I mean, it's got religion sort of right through it. And it's not how I remembered it, but it plainly is when you see it.
That's interesting, though, isn't it? That as a child, you would have fallen for a film like that, and then later in it's interesting.
Well, it's my dad who's here tonight, although he got lost and I nearly killed him for not answering his phone, so he's only just made it in here. But my dad put me onto sort of both of these. He's not noticeably a spiritual man, got his qualities, but spiritual is exactly what I call it. But it's interesting, I mean, these two, I remember specifically, he sat me in front of and said, watch these. And I asked him why, and he can't remember. So it might jog a few memories for him too.
Can I just ask if you just put your hand up, if you have seen Sergeant York before, have you seen it? So a really small number actually, but there's an awful lot of people here who are.
I'm so chuffed. I'm so chuffed you're here. But I mean, Frank Skinner's here as well, who did one of these before, and he said it's kind of awful when you sit down and watch the film. I think, well, have I sold them all a pop? Is it? I mean, I'm going to take it personally if you find it boring or silly or something.
Well, it was nominated for 11 Oscars and it won 2. Yeah. Gary Cooper won an Oscar for Best Actor.
Well, I've got a friend who's a film director, and he came round to watch it with me. So just give me some sort of point of seeing it through a film director's eyes, which is always really interesting. And as he pointed out, there's bits in it where it looks totally sort of antiquated almost. Plonk a camera, static in front of people talking. It's like you just filmed a play, and then by the end of it, you'll see it's incredibly sophisticated sort of filming techniques. And it looks way ahead of its time. Similarly, in some respects, it's a very subtle film with subtle messaging, but then in other respects, it's just a straightforward down the line propaganda film you could see. So you never quite know where you are with it. And suddenly you see the bit of love interest. Suddenly it's been quite sophisticated, and then suddenly somebody's rubbed Vaseline all over the lens, and you've got all that soft focus thing going on. It's sort of uneven in that respect. But I've watched it twice now within the last month, and I can't wait to watch it again. I mean, it's such a privilege to see it on a big screen. When will I ever get the chance to do that?
But you're right in what you say in terms of it does, it really kind of is a balance between the two. There are some moments of dialogue which are probably unintentionally funny.
Yeah.
And it does seem very kind of quaint, and there is that real kind of propaganda thing where there are times where an actor is having a moment in the background, there's God Save the Queen, and then it goes into sort of pack up your troubles, and it's very patriotic, it's very 1941, do your bit for your country.
The dialogue, so the accent I found fascinating. I'm kind of enchanted by the accent, but I don't know how people spoke in Tennessee. I don't know how to speak there now, let alone in 1942 when it was made, or 1915 or 17 or whatever when it was set. But so I don't know how authentic it is. Maybe they're overacting horrendously. I don't know, but I just love the way they talk, using words and sort of syntax I've never come across before.
And there is actually a scene, isn't there, when he joins the army and the other guys are saying to him about the fact they can't understand what he's saying.
I've had that as a broadcaster myself when I first joined the BBC, actually.
I mean, there was a time in terms of the BBC when it was all about received pronunciation, but regional accents have become much more in. I mean, you must have been sort of pretty much on the sort of the wave when that was.
Well, yeah, I just think
really.
there's still not many Brummies on there. I was talking to these media students today in Sheffield, and they all had quite strong regional accent, and there was the odd Brummie there sounding much more Brummie than me. And I always say to them, it only ever worked to my advantage because, when I first joined the BBC on work experience, the expectations of me were so low. I mean, I just walked in with all these sort of Oxbridge-educated people, all speaking with C pronunciation, my knuckles dragging along the floor. I mean, all I had to do in any meeting was just construct 2 coherent sentences. And then the lad's a bloody genius. I mean, it's like listen at him. He can talk properly, even with that accent. He can say intelligent things. So, people start off with such low expectations. The similar things happen actually, being known for only doing football. If I broadcast about religion or something, people think, wow, I thought he only ever talked about football.
But you have increasingly talked about religion, haven't you? I mean, very recently you were talking about how television seems to be forgetting religion, and it's much more about sort of focusing on the sort of the more extreme sides.
I think you see the extremists from in all the religions depicted. I would keep saying, ordinary people of religion, perfectly normal people doing less harm than good. And, as I keep saying, Jesus said the meek shall inherit the earth. Well, they might do, but they're getting no PR along the way at all. I mean, you just don't see the meek at all, just going about their business. The kind of people I share my spiritual space with, if you like, Jews, Muslims, Christians, whatever.
So we're going to watch Sergeant York in a moment. At the time, it was hugely successful. It made a massive amount of money. They kept bringing it back. Every time there's a film didn't play very well, they just bring Sergeant York back because it was always guaranteed to fill the seats.
I didn't know.
And apparently as well, the other big thing was that, because obviously it was during the Second World War period, there was definitely a massive increase in terms of people running off to go and enlist and sign up.
That almost saddens me, I suppose, because that sort of gives the game away. It was a recruitment film, but
a very good one,
job,
and obviously the film was released at the time did have a kind of propaganda edge, but that doesn't mean they're not good. It just means that they were.
But I mean,
time.
what must it feel like? You're in, I don't know, the Battle of the Bulge. You're drawing your dying breath, having been shot or something. Think, if I hadn't watched Sergeant Bloody York, I wouldn't be here.
Well, let's see if it has the same effect on our audience today.
Okay.
Adrian,
don't enlist anyone. There's no need. There's plenty out there.
A big thank you to Adrian Chiles.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.